Welcome everybody to the Open Skills Network, our first showcase of 2022. We're going to be talking about 21st century skills, digital micro-credentials, and making in-demand job skills visible. And we're excited to have our two esteemed presenters today. But before we get to the main attraction, I want to just do a little bit of housekeeping for the OSN. First, we would like to remind, or actually not remind, but let everybody know that, as you know, our partner WGU initiated a soft launch late last year for the Open Skills Management tool. And that initial soft launch is going to be opened up fully to the public. All the gates are coming down, and we're excited about this. This is going to be happening on January 31st. So do stay tuned and check out the Open Skills Network webpage so that you can activate fully and dive into the GitHub section for Osmint and start playing around. We're excited to have you there. And speaking of Osmint, later this year in April, we're going to be doing a showcase talking about Osmint enhancements. So if you've been playing with Osmint and you have some ideas on where it could go, what it could do, we'd like to hear from you. And we're going to be talking too about things that we've got on our list for ideas on how to build this amazing tool and really grow it into something even more incredible than it already is. And in February, we invite you to join us for a showcase on skills libraries. So please do check out the events page on the OSN website and make sure you register. So first of all, we'd like to take a moment to say our appreciation for funding provided by Walmart that makes these showcases and so much of the work that OSN does possible. And we thank them for their continued support. So one last piece of housekeeping before we begin. We'd like to introduce to the OSN community, Christina Caldwell. She is going to be managing the OSN community outreach and engagement. So Christina, if you'd like to just quickly turn on your camera and maybe just say hi to the group for a moment, we'd love to just put a face to the name and let everybody know about the amazing work that you're going to be doing.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christina Caldwell. I am the new OSN Community Manager. My role, my essential function will be around OSN member management, work group coordination, and just the overall communications and strategy of moving OSN forward. So I look forward to working with all of you, meeting all of you, and learning from everyone. Really excited to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Now, on to the main show here. We're going to be talking about 21st century skills, digital micro-credentials, making in-demand job skills visible. And we have got an incredible presenting partner today, a proud OSN member and an organization that is doing incredible work in the skills ecosystem. And this is the Education Design Lab. And we have two amazing skills warriors who are doing incredible work. And we're so excited to have them here talking about it. One is Kathleen Delasky, the Education Design Lab founder and CEO. And the other is Naomi Boyer, Education Design Lab's Executive Director of Digital Transformation. And at this point, I'd like to kick it over to them and let them lead the show. Thank you both for being here and spending your time with OSN today.
Thank you, Christian. That's really nice to be called a skills warrior. I love that term. I feel like OSN is the place where we, it's like base camp for these skills warriors, right? You all have been kind of the engine room really for designing the skills infrastructure. And I feel like we're at an exciting juncture as we think about how does that infrastructure live in the world and support the goals of equity and opportunity that we're all, it's the reason that we're all here. So thank you. I'm excited to see how Osmint starts to really scale and speed up the skillification, if you will, of learning. So just a bit about us. I'm going to just give a tiny bit about my background, and Naomi will do the same, just so you have the context for us. in this presentation, but I spent my career in several different sectors. So I never know how to give advice to people about what they should do or what path they should go on, because I've been on many paths. I spent 15 years in TV journalism, a stint as a political appointee in government, and then probably one of my most formative times in relation to this work is I spent 5 years at the dawn of the internet age at this little startup that was at a nondescript office building in Vienna, Virginia, called America Online. It's now AOL, but we were sort of the engine room for how does this thing called the internet live in the consumer world, and that's been really influencing me as I think about this stage that we're in now. I also I moved on to education and worked in K-12 and higher ed, and was involved in starting several nonprofits. But the one that I'm most excited about, and I feel that all my other roles led up to, like thinking about all the different pieces that we have to manage and think about here, is the Education Design Lab, which we started 8 years ago, and we'll get into that in a minute. Naomi?
Yes, hello everybody. Happy New Year. Welcome to you all. I'm seeing many of my friends, introducing themselves in chat. It's great to be here. Just a little bit about my background, and then we're going to dig in more with Kathleen as she shares her perspectives in this space. But I started out as a special education teacher and wound my way to university and college administration. And I can't believe it. I've been with Education Design Lab for almost 3 years now. It's been a phenomenal 3 years. But in my 20 plus years in education, yep, I'm dating myself, one thing has remained constant, and that's my passion for transformational learning. In my current work, I have the advantage of traversing the divide between formal education and the workplace, and engaging in design and implementation of models that both value degree completion and support new ways of unbundling the degree to facilitate learning over a lifetime. So as the Executive Director for Digital Transformation at Education Design Lab, I am so privileged to get the opportunity to work on projects and continue to contribute to the thought leadership of the skills ecosystem. And that's where all of us are here today, to talk about that skills ecosystem. And I'm going to make a pledge right now that I'm going to do my best to avoid the acronyms, right? Because we've heard OSMID already, we've heard RSDs, and I'm going to try to spell those out as I go along, because I know how confusing it gets. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Kathleen so that we can go ahead and get started.
Well, thanks, Naomi. So just a little bit about the lab. So there's so many cool organizations coming into the ecosystem to help design. And our role is really to think about design of models and tools and processes and, systems architecture, and implement models, but to do it on the ground, to help design them, but then to follow through with what is it? But models that start with the learner, or in a workforce context that start with the earner. So we used to only be focused on the learner, but as this transformation work started to evolve into the workforce space, we're now saying the learner earner, or the earner, or however you want to describe that. But on the next slide, you can see a little bit about our how we're thinking about the what we call the design criteria. So these colors in green, or these words in green, are really our 5 what we call universal design criteria that have been gleaned from working with all of these partners, and from talking to thousands of learners and earners. We've really been able to kind of crystallize or summarize the key what we call design criteria into these 5 categories. Now, some of them, the industry or the ecosystem has been working on for years, but we would argue that portability and visibility are the ones that are particularly relevant to the work that OSN is doing. And this is newer work and needs some explanation. And we're going to actually be doing a focus on visibility over the next couple of months that we want to kind of preview here with you today. We'll be doing a presentation about it at the IMS Global Digital Credentials Summit in Atlanta next month. So on the next slide, you get a sense of, this is sort of the mindset that we try to help colleges think through when we design with colleges, is to think that, just to understand that, we all care about students. That's why we're here. That's why we do this work. but to design with learners first in the primary design seat is actually quite different than a lot of what's been done for 500 years in this model. And that to put the needs of learners first is actually hard because there's so many constraints and regulations, et cetera. And to put employers second is also kind of new think or new-ish think. And then to have the institutional needs play a role of constraints rather than focus, for design focus, is how we work with colleges. And it's been really an interesting ride, but one that people are really excited about and have adopted and leaned into. We also want to make sure that in this presentation, when we talk about new majority learners, that is what we would argue 60% to maybe 75% of learners who college was not originally designed for. And this is a list of some of the key groups in that category. But when we talk about new majority learners, we mean everyone for whom the system needs to be redesigned. And this skills-based ecosystem that we're creating together is a key piece of that. Next slide. We really see the what we call the moral imperative for equity. We try to keep kind of front and center as our mission. And we these four bullets that you see are really we would argue they're sort of the categories, some of the areas of work that we're doing across all of our lab initiatives. I see that Tara Laughlin is in the crowd. She is our lead on X-Credit, which Walmart.org is also helping us fund. That's an example of the kind of work that we're doing to help make this system more visible. Next slide, Naomi. And I wanted to show this slide as we get into before we get into Naomi's presentation, because it's really an example of the kinds of things that we need to do to create a visible ecosystem. It's sort of the work that we need to do together. And now that the infrastructure layer is really starting to come together, okay, what's this? We call this the learning layer or the tools layer, or some might call the apps layer. But it's really about how do you solve for some of the barriers I mentioned on the previous page across the learner journey. And we try to think about this from the learner journey, whether you're working on connecting any learning opportunity into a skills wallet that is a resume, but that resume is thought of very differently because it also becomes the enabler or the career advisor itself. It becomes the job posting because this all gets connected. And that's really what we mean by visible. On the next slide, you will see that we wanted to make the point that all of this starts with a micro-credential. And one of the reasons we feel that micro-credentials have gained credibility over the years, we started pushing this as a model, in 2013, when people were still using the word badge, and people couldn't get past their Girl Scout sash, and we're struggling with this idea that our new ecosystem can really be based on micro credentials as the bricks or the building blocks. And for these three bullets really represent the reasons why, when we think about, we don't need to tell you this, that's why a lot of us are here, but we feel that there's an awareness campaign that still needs to happen across as to explain why we need to break learning down in order to build this visible system. Next slide. And so these are the reasons. This is sort of how we're building a case around the why, and using micro-credentials and all the pieces that you all are working on as sort of the Rosetta Stone that where things can be created and put stacked together to solve problems and unlock opportunity on the learner and worker side and on the employer side, which is key to think about as well. And then this next slide really is just one example of how the lab is doing that. So if we say we need to break down the learning into the smallest possible skills so that they can be stacked in different ways and be flexible and stackable, This is an example of redesign that we are doing across. Right now, we're working with 24 community colleges to build what we call micro pathways, and these are role-specific new credentials that are helping employers name the stack of skills they need in order to hire for a certain role, and they help learners see what it takes to get hired for that role, and then they help colleges see, okay, these are credentials that we could be offering and still be true to our desire to grant degrees, because we can stack them together and people can come in and out of learning, etc. And we find that this model is really taking off. We've got 30 with these 24 colleges. The first cohort is 11 colleges. We have 30 of these micro pathways named, and we're working. Naomi could talk to you about. We're working with Credential Engine and to get them, into the registry, one by one. But there's a lot of ancillary effects that are starting to happen as we work in 10 regions now. To start to use this model, and you can kind of see it as the start of something. So that's one example that I'll give, and Naomi's going to talk about others. Naomi, I think then we go our next slide. Yeah, so we just wanted to start with a poll of, and I'll let Naomi's going to give you instructions on it, but the sort of the visible system that I'm painting that a lot of you think about as well. We'd love to get your opinion on how long you think it takes us to get there. So I'll turn it over to Naomi to set the poll up.
Yes, because now we want to hear from you. We've been letting you sit for long enough, right? And there's multiple options for you to be able to respond to the polling questions we have in this presentation. So we actually have 2 questions for you. You can text to it's in your who it's going to 22333. You can put in the lab, and then that'll join you to the poll, or you can go to pollev.com/the-lab in your browser, or, and I know some of you are already responding, good for you, you can also scan this QR code on your phone and it'll take you right to that specific page to contribute. But I need you to help me finish the statement. The establishment of proven models that demonstrate how learner-earner skill visibility can lead to jobs can be expected to happen when? Are we there now? 1 to 2 years from now? 3 to 5, 6 to 9, or a decade from now? Are you thinking? And we can see those responses come in. Folks are saying, 1 to 2 years is the largest majority of responses. 3 to 5 years, we have 50%. And I'll say while you all are responding that interestingly, a forecast was made yesterday in our Community College Growth Engine Fund convening. This is a big event, really successful yesterday. But Dr. Glasper from the League of Innovation said yesterday that he expects the merging of credit and non-credit learning systems, processes, and outcomes to happen in the next 5 to 7 years. And it was also substantiated by another college president, that he didn't see it being more than a decade away. Some of this stuff is really going to be a game changer for the skills-based learning. 1 to 2 years.
Naomi, Rupert in the chat is saying that it will take longer in the US than it will in some other parts of the world, which I completely concur with. We are learning a lot from international partners.
Yes, and I think we're graced with some international partners on the call today. So welcome to all of you, both those of us that are North America centric and those that are either watching the recording because of the time is god awful time for you, or joining right now. So I'm going to go on to the next one. And what are skills? How are these different than competencies? So just to give a lens for this particular presentation, competencies are knowledge and skills and abilities and dispositions and characteristics and behaviors. Skills, of course, are only one element of competencies and tend to be more demonstrable and tangible than knowledge and abilities. In terms of common language and discussion of skills-based hiring, skills is synonymous with competencies, relating to more than just what someone can do and includes the know and can do. Regardless, competencies, skills need to be measurable and mastered. So I'm happy to be able to showcase Open Skills Network own Sarah DeMark and Joan Kozriev's definition of skills-based hiring here. Skills-based hiring leverages the objective skills required for a particular job role to match new or existing employee talent to job positions, instead of using the degree as a proxy for the perceived existing skills associated with that credential. So with that as a lens, what's the difference between competencies and competency frameworks? Competencies are single statements. So when we're talking about rich skill descriptors, they're single statements. Competencies compile into frameworks that reflect academic credentials, job roles, or other functions. So it's the layering of those individual statements. And so what you see here is a general process that I've been thinking about for instituting a skills strategy to make the learning process and the learner visible. I'm going to walk you through these steps. The first, and I would say this is like the most important step, it's the critical step to begin this journey, is to disaggregate typical learning outcomes and broad learning objectives to competency statements or skill statements. These can be different. Oops, I didn't mean to switch that slide, sorry. These may be different levels of granularity and can represent knowledge, skills, abilities, dispositions, attitudes, etc. A rich skill descriptor, or RSD, as you may hear within the Open Skills Network, provides a means for digitally organizing information and details about the skills and competencies. These competencies cluster to represent courses, short-term credentials like certificates and micro-credentials, and even longer-term credentials like degrees. So I'm looking at number 2 now. How do you organize these competencies? Frameworks are a way to organize the competencies. Libraries, collections, and taxonomies are other words that you might hear associated with the aggregation of these skills. Open Skills Management Tool, or OSMIT, which you heard Kristen mention earlier, helps us to take the skill statements out of the spreadsheets many of us were using to compile skill statements into a meaningful whole and digitize them following a shared data standard, which is the structure that a rich skill descriptor provides. There are other available tools and data standards for the cataloging of Credential Engine and frameworks, IMS Global Open SALT Case Standard, but Open Skills Management Tool provides a means of organizing the individual skill statements into collections, which then allows us to share these collection libraries internally with other departments, with other organizations, and within technology systems. In addition, the ability to map, align, and assess to document these skills becomes possible through the use of these rich skill descriptors. All of the steps I've just mentioned thus far are institutionally based, so within the academic or the employer organization. And the award of the digitization of skill achievements hits the tipping point to empower that learner-earner that Kathleen was mentioning early on at step 4. This is where the digital micro-credentials and comprehensive learner records or learner employment records are created in a way that can be shared with the individual who owns the skills that they have achieved, getting it out of that black box. In step 5 and 6, the process of curation and responsibility shifts from the organization to the learner-earner. And the collection of skills and competencies documented then may become available in a learner wallet and can be shared with employers, education institutions, and for other purposes. Kathleen's going to talk a little bit more about learner visibility further on in this discussion, but for now I will define a few terms and jump into the use of the tools described in these steps in the lab's 21st century skills framework and digital micro-credentials. That's kind of the use case that we're going to be using as we go along. So keep in mind that it's important to track the skills, but it also provides a vocabulary and a means for learner-earners to be able to successfully identify and communicate what they learned and know. And you're going to hear me say this a couple of times through the presentation. Explicit, intentional, and transparent integration of competencies into the learning experience is super duper important. It's an element in the process of awarding digital credentials and tracking the skills that can be expressed and demonstrated in the workplace. It's kind of the Google Maps on the drive to the destination of jobs. So the learner-earner becomes visible in step 4 of the process, but the learning becomes evident through the curriculum, which is shown in steps 1, 2, and 3. Communicating the competencies attempted and achieved helps learner-earners know and understand the criteria for mastery and integrate reflection points throughout so that the students can express the competencies they now have in their backpack for their life journey. So Education Design Lab engaged in over 7 years worth of research, development, and continued improvement in the 21st Century Skills Competency Framework and digital credentials that we developed. We co-designed with universities and had ongoing conversations with employers, learners, and validated the process along the way. The competency framework that emerged from this work was the foundation to the work we engaged in as part of the Open Skills Network Initial Collaborative. Visible stackable bits of learning is the lab platform for delivery of the learning experience to the digital micro-credentials I will share with you. We have a number of ways of implementing our digital micro-credentials, and plug-and-play modules via Visible is just one. Just as an FYI, we have other projects such as XCredit. You heard Kathleen mention that, and Tara's on the line with us, and a free toolkit that you can learn more about at our website at designlab.org. Now a bit more about the 21st Century Skills, the lab credentials and framework. What are 21st century skills? We can talk about a lot of different words that are used to describe these highly sought after skills. Other terms you may hear are employability, power, essential, durable, soft, and human skills. I could keep going, right? We aligned our language around 21st century skills as the moniker, but regardless of what they're called, the lab library includes the most in-demand skills that surfaced from our research and our work. There are 9. We just added number 9 for those of you that are aware of our framework called self-directed learning. Digital micro-credentials in the lab library. These are not an exhaustive set. The lab merely focused on the most requested and emphasized micro-credentials, knowing that others would emerge over time. One question you may be asking yourself, how in the heck do you measure empathy or any of these other hard to quantify skills? While the higher level competency, let's say empathy, may be difficult to measure, the lab has broken down each of the micro-credentials into 4 demonstrable, measurable sub-competencies. You can see from this slide that the particular digital micro-credential is focused on critical thinking, and the 4 associated sub-competencies are gather and assess relevant information, question assumptions, identify patterns, and draw conclusions. And you can see the descriptors under each of those. And while there are 4 sub-competencies within each of the 9 digital micro-credentials, our framework only has 23 sub-competencies. Bad math? Maybe not. So this is the lab's DC Metro map. And I'm going to ask you to come on a little bit of a journey with me that'll help me to explain how we have 23 rather than 32 sub-competencies. Let's get on the fuchsia line of oral communication. We're going to start at the first stop, which is speak with clarity and precision. This is the first sub-competency associated with this digital credential. And the subsequent stops, storytelling and appropriate tone and word choice, are also stops on the hub towards the oral communication digital micro-credential. However, when we get to listen actively, you're going to notice that it's 3 intersecting circles. And that's because listen actively shows 3 lines or micro-credentials that share that listen actively sub-competency: oral communication, empathy, and collaboration. You can see the intersections. So the lab does not believe that the 21st century skills can be taught through rote instruction or multiple choice. Resting upon the need to live, practice, and demonstrate the skills and actions, our competency framework and content include a structure of learn, practice, contribute, assess, and reflect. The quality, rigorous learning experience have been backward mapped from the assessment criteria to validate the sub-competencies. The sub-competency assessments, or proving grounds as we call them, are performance-based and employer-informed. I mentioned another project called XCredit that the lab currently has underway to validate existing skills that an individual might have. This work elevates the lived experiences that a person may have that can be validated and then awarded a 21st century skills digital micro-credential. moving away from required seat time to validate what someone might already know how to do. The explicit, intentional, and transparent process of facilitating the learning coupled with the award of the digital micro-credentials documenting the achieved skills provides the opportunity for learners to make themselves visible to employers who can use these credentials for hiring. But also, these same employers should be able to hear and see the skills in the hiring and work process. So when interviewing, the earner should be able to communicate how and why they know these skills. Again, note the focus on explicit and intention within the process. All right, it's time to hear from you again. You should already have access to the poll. This question, so what makes the 21st century skills more important now over the last decade? Why are we at an inflection point now? Is it because of automation? Is it because of managing COVID, complexity in the world, the great resignation, and the rise of the gig economy? I only made it so you can make one choice, and we didn't have an all of the above in here. So pick your best answer. I know I'm a hard teacher. Pick your best answer and let us know what you think.
It's interesting that no one's picking managing COVID, because we have heard from so many employers that COVID made them realize that 21st century skills were important.
Resilience, right? That is super important, but complexity in the world, I love it. That one seems to be taking preference here. Just going to give a couple more seconds for folks to respond. Okie dokie, I'm going to move it along. So while the lab framework was in existence long before Open Skills Network began this work, tracking and sharing information in a digital skills format was not in place. The Rich Skill Descriptor Initial Collaborative provided the lab the opportunity to take our framework that I just shared with you and digitize the information. We were fortunate to be able to participate in two of the original pilots, one in which we led and the other in which we partnered. Let me share a little bit about the work that was underway in the spring and summer of 2021. The first Exploratory Collaborative rolled out 14 pilot projects in April of 2021. This work focused on how rich skill descriptors and open skills management tool could be used to further a variety of skills ecosystem projects in the design, implementation, alignment, connection, and documentation of skills. There were projects that covered broad topics such as leadership, cybersecurity, 21st century or transferable skills, teaching, and other IT certificates. The lab participated in two projects, a cybersecurity mapping alignment project with Western Governors University, Ivy Tech Community College, Southern New Hampshire University, and NIST. And the other project, the lab took the lead on taking our framework and putting it into that digitized format. We were honored to be selected as a participant in the first collaborative, and it was joined by a number of partners in the work. Represented on the team were next generation simulation and extended reality vendors Muzzy Lane and Tailspin, badge issuing vendors systems Credly and Badger, learning management system Matrix by Cipher Learning, content provider Everfi, which is now Vector Solutions, National Student Clearinghouse, MyHub. We worked with the MyHub wallet, and we are particularly fortunate to have HR Open Standards, IMS Global, and Credential Engine also partner and investigate how to maintain both content and granularity as part of the testing of this skills collection process. HR Open Standards has actually already integrated the resulting RSD collection as part of their assessment work group XAPI development. So we've seen things and get traction and move forward. Beyond establishing and publishing the existing 21st Century Skills Competency Framework, which also lives in Credential Engine's registry and IMS Global's Case Network Lab, the lab, which often serves as a connector by spanning organizational boundaries, aggregated a team of partners to explore how do we do this? The resulting RSD, Rich Skill Descriptor collection, might be implemented in a variety of technologies to serve the institutions and businesses that are searching for a means to create, catalog, capture, award, and document experiences and credentials. The anticipated and achieved project outcomes were to establish open access to the lab's framework, explore implementation possibilities with a varieties of vendors and data standard bodies, and to build relationships to connect skills ecosystems. This then led to the how do we do this demonstrations that are currently underway. What was accomplished by the collaborative, by the 14 pilots? Some of this will be a little technical, so bear with me, but we learned some really valuable things across all the pilot projects, and here's some of the insights. Many organizations are looking to map competencies and skills within and across organizations to facilitate the learner journey, provide learning outcome connections throughout the content, and create interoperability across the technology systems. The rich skills descriptors provide rich metadata that serves as additional contextual information as part of the micro-credentials, learner records, and learner wallets. The rich skill descriptors increase the ability to make assessment and achievement data more portable and provide language for communication by learner earners about what they have gained. The Open Skills Management tool did provide a means for entering the skills with descriptive data, creating a catalog and grouping of skills, and then sharing that information out with other organizations. But here's some lessons that I personally learned. The context of a particular skill statement really matters. The use of the alignment field can help to add this context, but the skills libraries are lists of skills and don't necessarily show the interrelationships between the skill statements. Maintaining our shared openness. Openness is key. Openness of skills libraries and collections, open technology standards, openly accessible, machine readable, humanly consumable to be fully optimized by tech tools and the community at large. This is very, very important. The RSD collections need to be able to be updated regularly and allow for any connection to the skills frameworks to receive synchronized information to maintain fidelity across systems and organizations that have been previously mentioned. Now, here's the most important thing that came out of the collaboratives, I think, and it was the meaningful dialogue, the foundational relationships, and the opportunity to learn from others that were contributing to the crafting of the skills ecosystem. Essentially, this was driving the skills economy. And this is one of our great value propositions and the work that we're all doing as part of Open Skills Network. So I mentioned the Open Skills Management tool, OSMIT, as you'll hear it referred to. We have two collections, and these two QR codes will, if you scan it, it'll take you to those two collections. But I wanted to point out to you why we have two collections. The first collection is the original framework, the one I shared with you with the Metro map. The details on the slide may be hard to read because of the size of the font, but again, you can get to the QR code and see the system yourself. This particular example is a sub-competency that is embedded in collaboration, empathy, and oral communication. It's that listen actively one I walked you through. And you can see in the first original, listen actively, it says, form productive working relationships, ensures that others feel heard and valued, and grasp and retain information. Note the semicolons, which have the future arrows going to them, that indicate those three individual skill statements that are in that one skill statement. When I get into the 21st century skill individual collection, this disaggregates those three, the subcolon, semicolon separations into three separate listen actively statements, just so you know what you're looking at. And so here's just an example. We're getting to the how, right? How do we do this work? What does it look like? What was the benefit of having a rich skill descriptor library or a collection? Vector Solutions, a partner in previously EverFi Higher Ed division, participated with us in the first collaborative, is a great example of how the RSD collections can be used for content mapping, skills framework alignment, and value add to customers leading to scale. Vector Solutions is enhancing not only moving forward toward the award of digital micro-credentials for completion of their core courses, but also piloting the opportunity to offer the lab's 21st century skills credentials by aligning their content and framework, substantiating where the skills are assessed, and potentially awarding these credentials as stacked credentials resulting in completion of a series of courses. The compliance courses offered by Vector Solutions can then tangibly demonstrate workplace skills of learners that link gained knowledge from student affairs programming. These are the content that we have to do, to job practices in ways that previously was not possible. The large number of learners who access Vector Solutions content provides a unique opportunity to scale recognition of digital micro-credentials of these highly coveted 21st century skills. Okay, back to my steps. Going back to the 6-step process, we primarily focused on step 2 and 3, which moves into some of the how to document achieved skills in step 4. All of this work is really in the hands of the organization. In most cases, it's either unseen or integrated into the learning process. It's the infrastructure needed to lead the learner-earner agency and empowerment. And I'm going to hand it off to Kathleen again to take you on the next steps of this journey. And she's going to be honing in on the essence of the lab, equity and equitable opportunities to access meaningful work, leading to economic mobility for all learner-earners.
Naomi, why don't we pause for 1 second? There's some great questions in the chat. I think some of them might take more discussion, which we have for the last, we want to have time for. But one of them I think was quick, which is, where is the case network? Or sorry, where's the case standard here? Or where's the case framework?
So the case, if you email me.
Version of this framework, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so Case Network Labs is with IMS Global, and I'd be happy to share links to that actual framework repository if anybody emails me. Our email's at the end of this deck, but it's nboyer@eddesignlab, that's all one word, .org. And I'll be happy to send you links to the Case Network.
Great, and we can get to a few of the other questions in a minute. It might take more back and forth, but yeah. So I'm just ending our presentation, sort of bookending it with this, coming back to the need for the visible ecosystem, which I think everyone in this room gets. But we feel like at the lab, we often feel like all the work that Naomi has just described around making this, making the system work, that we don't want to lose sight of the, okay, how does it live in the world? What are the use cases? And how do we begin to test those and build the awareness of the why? Why should learners care? Why should earners care? Why should employers care? And I mean, so I wanted to just kind of list what we see at the lab is sort of 4, there are others, but the 4 barriers to equity that we're solving for here. And why this is so exciting, and why, certainly why we're at the table, and probably why you're at the table too. But we want to keep connecting those dots to have a bigger, broader conversation, beyond those of us who are, really interested in the details and the infrastructure piece. So I won't go through these, but you kind of see what motivates us and so many to care about this, and why we think it really is catching on as a movement for sure, and the growth of OSN has been so fast. Next slide. So we've kind of reduced the on the next slide, we've reduced the kind of the jobs to be done, as we've taken some of the key ones and put them in this Venn diagram and we're coming out with a paper on this later this in early spring, probably, to really kind of ask for a call to action among stakeholders beyond this group. I mean, this group is doing great stuff to actually build the thing, right? And but a lot of other folks need to be involved, and what do we need them to do? So we would love to, think of this as a draft statement. We're actually going to be doing a design session. We've been invited to do one at the GSV conference, if any of you are going to that, in April 4th to 6th. And I know we've asked Credential Engine to be involved in this session, but we would love to have others to think about what are the different stakeholders? What do we need them to do? I've highlighted the ones in the sweet spot here, but really assessments are key, right? We need to adopt assessments that validate experience, but also that capture and assess the kind of learning that hasn't been assessed heretofore, or that can't be judged by just straight demonstration, in the way that GitHub, for example, has helped in the IT industry. How do we do that for 21st century skills and everything else? Those are pieces we're working on. How do we design and fund work experience? And how do we bust silos across the learner journey? Those are 3 that we are particularly focused on, and would love to start a conversation with you all about how you think about that. And then the last slide for me that I'm also just want to socialize with this group, and Naomi and I and others have been working on this at the lab, is what you heard, you saw at the beginning, I listed those 5 universal design criteria for how to help learners or meet the needs of learners as we design new learning models. Well, what about this skills-based ecosystem? What are the design criteria that must be true for our system to be equitable? And we've heard a lot of you talk about open and portable, and we just want to make sure these other ones, I mean, visible, I think people get, maybe that we just haven't used that term. What is the list? And when we do design criteria with project, we say 4 to 6, right? There's not, you can't, if you have too many on your list, then nothing gets done, because it's, it actually doesn't help you prioritize. But what are the most important design criteria for this system? And we'll be pushing on that at that session in April, but would love to have dialogue with this group as well on that, on the design criteria, because we think it does help drive, it sets guardrails, it helps us drive the conversation about whether things that are being done are or are not creating visibility, or how do we help states set their standards, et cetera. So with that, Naomi, I think we probably want to go to questions.
I think that would be fabulous. I'm trying to answer some of them in the chat as we speak.
Great.
And here's our email addresses to follow up with us after the fact if you want any additional information or you weren't able to get some of the links that we were mentioning. We're happy to share those afterwards as well.
Thank you both so much. We've been doing our best, my colleagues, to capture a lot of the questions in the chat. If people do have further questions, please do throw them into the chat now, and we'll do our best to kind of facilitate a little bit of a Q&A. So I know that some of these you have taken a crack at answering in the chat, but I want to give you an opportunity to just expound on them a little further if you desire. But Noah asks, regarding the subway map, do various colors in the credential bubbles indicate strands such that some might be modular that allows them to be plugged into multiple pathways?
So the colors themselves are really representative of an individual. Let me see if I can go back to that slide for you all, of the individual sub-competency. Just bear with me, folks. Sorry. Heading on back through. Oh, there it is. I passed it. Okay, there it is. So the color of the line relates to the individual's competency statement. Oral communication is fuchsia all the way through. Where you're seeing 3 color lines come together, again, looking at the hub, how many circles there are in each hub, that's the interconnection. It doesn't change color there, but it's where those 3 are coming together. I'm not sure whether I fully answer that question.
I think that's great.
Okay.
But we have another one, before you move the slide, we have another one that relates to this slide too. This is from Jason. He says here, if you're defining competencies as a, quote, statement of knowledge, skills, and abilities, end quote, I see that as making skills a child of competencies. Then in the 21st century skills map, skills are broken down into sub-competencies, which seems to flip the relationship previously defined. What am I missing?
Yep, love it. And I tried to respond to this one in chat, and really it comes down to vocabulary. And with all of our partners, both employers and higher ed institutions, it seems like everyone is kind of using a different vocabulary around competency, sub-competency, skills, and how we lay all this out. The lab, when we developed our framework, originally started with competencies as the highest level. So the 9 that you see on here, those oral communication, intercultural fluency, resilience, initiative, self-directed learning, collaboration, creative problem solving, empathy, and critical thinking, we define those as competencies. Underneath, we're calling those sub-competencies because those really could be skills. Some of them in the statement that underlies them could be skills, but some of them are actually behaviors. Some of them are attitudes, right? They're all demonstrable though. So regardless of whether it's a knowledge element, a skill, a behavioral element, they are a child of the competencies, these sub-competencies, but they may be indicative of cognitive versus non-cognitive opportunities there. So That's the differences in our particular terminology.
Perfect. Thank you. Now, I know that Kelvin's question here, Kathleen took a crack at answering, but I wanted to give you both a chance to build out further. It's sort of he asked two here that one was related, what will it take for 2 to 4 year colleges and universities to share skill frameworks instead of developing their own? And then in relation to that, what is the cost for a community college to do this work without grant funding?
Mm-hmm.
Love it. So Kathleen, I didn't see your response, but I'll jump in with you.
Yeah, so I think that Kelvin's question came at the time that I was talking about the micro pathway worker. That was the assumption I made. So I put in the chat that we are now trying to figure out, there's so many colleges interested in doing the micro pathway model that we're trying to figure out, okay, is there a lighter touch version and potentially credentialing, like a certification process that we can create to help schools to access that without having to raise the money involved that have been that it's cost for the first 2 cohorts. So we should have that ready by the end of this year. And I think Kelvin's other question is best. Oh, and by the way, if anyone's interested in that, just email either me or I put Lisa Larson's, she's the head of the Community College Growth Engine Fund. I put her email in the chat, but feel free to email me and I can get you to the right person, because we are trying to build a list of who's interested. So for sure, let us know. And I think Naomi, for the other question, you're probably best.
Kelvin, hey, my friend Kelvin, it's so great to hear from you. Yes, so I love this question because one of the reasons we get so excited when we have a education provider, an employer, a region, a state adopt our framework is because if every institution, if every organization designs their own credentials and their own competency frameworks and their own listing of skills around these really meaningful and high demand skills, employers are going to be even more confused than they already are when they start to see these digital credentials. There's a lot of literature out there that talks about the proliferation of credentials and the confusing nature of it. But if employers can start to recognize both the imagery and the frameworks behind it, then we are in a position where it can be elevated, I think, and it helps with the sense making. So that's the first piece of it. The second piece of it is the sharing. We know there's academic programs. I'll use education as an example. There are national education preparation program standards that are out there that many colleges and universities bring in. It doesn't keep them from teaching their own way and doing what they want to do, but it allows them in professional fields to teach towards a standard. And so using and adopting a framework like ours is I don't think is unheard of, right? And it's not necessarily pushing those limits too far. What does become difficult is thinking about how we integrate these things into our existing systems. And sometimes there's pinch points there, both in processes and technologies that allow for that adoption. And I think the more that we can have openness, we're back to that open element in the sharing of frameworks, the better our entire community can learn together. And I think that somewhat goes to some of Rupert's pressing as well as,
I was going to say that we could answer Rupert's question the same, because like the Venn diagram that I showed at the end, one of the key jobs for states really is to push and incent adoption of frameworks at least across the state. And then, I think for all of us to think about what are the advocacy platform that we can use to get people to adopt across states, because wouldn't that be amazing if you had that interoperability and that gets us to the portability design criteria across states, incent adoption of common open frameworks. We put that as the lead thing that states should be thinking about. So if you have ideas or ways to help us push that, or how has it worked in other countries? I know you've had like OECD and international bodies that have been influential on the world stage, but that hasn't really worked here so well.
And I see
Perfect.
someone was asking for your email, Kathleen, so I'm going to go to our
Yep.
last slide here. So you
I
can
was just
put.
gonna, yep. I was gonna say, let's move to the last slide so people can see your email. And then we've got one final question here from Cheryl. And she asked to you, Naomi, you mentioned that it was hard to see the interrelationships of RSDs or rich skill descriptors in OSMIT, the Open Skills Management tool. I may have missed it, but how did you manage that gap? Do you have any thoughts about whether or how OSMIT could help facilitate that?
Great question, Cheryl. And there's a field in the rich skill descriptor schema that allows for the input of an alignment URI. And there's work to allow for more than one, which would be helpful because, as I mentioned, we have our framework in multiple systems and formats. But we utilized our framework. Our credentials live also in Credential Engine, which I mentioned. And we were able to tie back to Credential Engine's listing of our framework to show those interrelationships. And I know Credential Engine is also doing work to bring in the rich skill descriptor information into specific credentials so that not only is the credential and the competencies listed, but your full rich skill descriptor data could also be included there. And so that we were using Credential Engine as that connection. We also have another test project going on right now to be able to link across and align frameworks. In fact, just today I was in conversation with Joshua from Southern New Hampshire University about whether we can align, they're aligning their general education courses to our competency framework, and how can we show those alignments in Credential Engine to show the value between those systems. So we were using that as the connecting piece. Open Skills Management tool, as it develops, and I'll leave this to you, Christian, as it develops, whether that's something that's on the roadmap to be able to further show those interconnections.
Perfect, thank you. And then I see, Kathleen, that you were taking a crack at Chet's question regarding credentialing or accrediting. I mean, what is the role of regional accrediting bodies? So much of what they expect for evidence for criteria aligns to this discussion.
Right. It's such a great question that we also are looking at, who are the more sort of innovation-oriented regional or national accrediting bodies that we could go to try to have this conversation with. I won't name names because it's early days, but we are in conversations. And if you have suggestions of particular regional bodies that you think are open or starting to talk about this, please do email me or Naomi.
Yes, and I'm putting something in the chat right now because I do believe that if we get down to competency learning and listing of these skills rather than broad learning objectives, accreditors would be able to validate what is known by those that come through our processes, not just what is taught, right? And so I think it's a really interesting dialogue as we move forward, particularly around quality on short-term credentials, which is aligned to these micro-credentials, and what is the data that's needed to substantiate that the short-term credentials have value as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for presenting today and sharing all of your amazing work. And thank you to everyone who attended. We really appreciate you sharing your hour with us. And we invite you to continue this conversation within the work groups of OSN. And if you haven't joined, please dive in, be a part of it. There is amazing conversations happening behind the curtain, and we want to invite you to take a seat at that table. We'd also like to invite you and let you know that the Skills Summit for OSN will be happening this summer at some point. We are in the planning stages, and we invite you to email us. Let us know what you'd like to dig in more to. What would you like to chew on? What should be a part of that agenda? And do you have something you'd maybe like to present? And you can email us at info@openskillsnetwork.org. And we encourage you also to check out the OSN website for future events. Our February showcase will be about skills libraries. We've got OSMIT enhancements happening in April, and then March, the skills collaborative projects will check in. And so we've come to the end of our time today, and we'd love to extend a warm, heartfelt thank you to both Naomi and Kathleen for presenting today and all the amazing work happening at Education Design Lab. Thank you all so very much for being a part of this today.
Thank you for having us.